as Prateek mentioned, so my name is Akhil Jayaprakash. I work as a product manager at Amazon. Apart from the amazing introduction that Prateek gave, I did want to kind of first go through, what's the agenda, how am I going to structure this talk, and then get into the discussion or the talk in itself. So first one is I'll kind of speak about what I do and some disclaimers on what information you're going to see today. User persona. So we'll understand who are the key users that you commonly find when you go into the next 100 million users in India, and what are the challenges that they face. And once we understand that, I'll kind of point out a good example of a company who looks at solving this, right? So that's sort of the way I've structured it out. So it's three parts. First part is going to be understanding personas. Second part is going to be understanding the challenges that those personas face, and the third part is going to be about what exactly are they going to, which company in India is actually solving that. So going into what I do, apart from what Prateek just mentioned, the job that I do at Amazon is essentially enabling Amazon experiences to be the fastest in India. So that includes redesigning our pages ground up for better performance, building new last mile technologies. So today everyone coming from tier 2, tier 3 cities, they'll probably be coming through a geo network or through a low end device. How do we understand? How do I look at improving that experiences? And then designing new experiences that improve perceived latency. So as you're going through an Amazon page, be it a video, be it a retail experience, or be it even payments that you make on Amazon, how do you make sure that as a user that's transacting through it, you don't see any spinning wheels, you don't see, you have a very seamless transition from page 1 to like page 2 or page 3. With that, we are hiring. So we're looking for technical TPMs and Android networking engineers. So if anyone has any leads, or if you're interested, please ask them to drop a DM on Twitter. My Twitter handle is AkhilJP_dev. It's really important. We do want to get folks involved early on. These are like multi-year projects. Apart from my day job, my side hustle is investing in startups. I kind of try and spread the bets as much as possible. So it goes across FMCG to EVs, and one of them is actually looking for a React Native engineer and UX designers. If you have any, do let me know. Also, if you have a startup or an interesting idea, just drop your note. Happy to brainstorm, happy to discuss that. Okay, so with that, let me go into sort of, I'll set the story here, right? So I do want to talk about, I do want to talk about like why should we understand, understand and solve for the right problems? Why is it necessary to do that? So what you're seeing on the screen right now is a night map of Europe from 2010. So the black and white sections that you're seeing on the screen, that's essentially a night map. The white ones are essentially lights. The yellow is essentially the borders of the Roman Empire, right? And the red ones are actually the roads that the Romans built within the empire that they had. The takeaway here is, if you look at the areas where it's white, it's actually very focused on those red lines that has been drawn. So what they essentially did was, like, what you're seeing here is like the next 1,500 years of civilization essentially revolved around these roads that the Romans built. So your whatever solution that you build for new generations or for new set of users, you want to be very sure about, is this the right step? Have I really solved the problem that they have? So again, it's just a context, right? Like whatever you put in first, or whatever solution you introduce to a new cohort is going to stick. Like if they love it, it's going to stick, and you would end up, you would have end up essentially living with that particular solution for a long while. And I'll give you an example of this, right? One of the worst decisions e-commerce companies have taken in India is cash on delivery. It's a great customer experience, but it hurts e-commerce companies a lot. I'll quote a public data on this, right? Like Find, FIND, is a company that actually rolled out cash on delivery and then rolled it back, because what they realized is, so initially when they started, they didn't have cash on delivery. their return to origin, that means the number of items that's actually returned back, was about 0.12%. But as soon as they rolled out cash on delivery, that went up to like 31%. And why is that a problem, right? Because let's say if you have to deliver something to a user, that'll probably cost you 100 rupees. If someone's returning that back, it's again going to cost you another 100 rupees. So what you're essentially doing there is, when someone's returning back, you're not even getting any margin on the product that you sell. So literally, it's zero revenue for you, and you're still paying out 200 rupees to get one single product back. So it's definitely a loss-making thing, right? And surprisingly, what that company found out was, well, the industry norm is 34%, and which is something that is acceptable, right? Like, and that's where I'm trying to, my emphasis here is, whenever you're looking at a new market, whenever you're looking at a new persona, the kind of solution that you build as well, you got to think long term, and that's where stuff like what Amazon kind of does, which is working backwards. Like, imagine the future, start from there, and then work backwards, right? Like, and then what are the guardrails that you're going to have, or you need to have, to ensure that your business is sustainable while you build the best customer experience possible. So that's sort of the context here, right? And that's the reason why this particular topic becomes important if you happen to solve for the next 100 million users. So with that, let me switch into sort of who are the users here, right? So there are three personas that you usually look at when you go into the next 100 million users. Again, these are people that you will find in tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities. The first one is something where almost everyone is very aware of, which is the aspiring Gen Z, right? So this is a Gen Z population. And the reason why I've kept aspiring there, I'll talk about a bit in the next slide. But they are essentially like, they understands technology. They do understand technology, and they want to live that high bar lifestyle, right? So that's the reason why I kind of kept it as aspiring Gen Z. The second aspect of it is women. So a lot of women are actually coming in from the next 100 million users, right? And that's essentially their first, interaction with the internet. They are using a device probably for the very first time. So it's a very common, these are like the common cohorts that you see. And the last one is determined merchants, right? So these are shopkeepers who usually are very reluctant in going online. They're scared to put their inventory online. They worry that someone else might take the inventory away and their customers away. So now you see that cohort rising. So this cohort, I kind of introduced this cohort after COVID. So with the whole COVID happening, a lot of these shopkeepers are not getting that much foot traffic. So they are essentially they're trying to innovate themselves to better, get better sales. So how do you do that? I'll kind of talk about what are the challenges that each one of them face. And I'll start with the aspiring Gen Z, right? So there are two parts to this. Like, one is sort of the behavioral data. Like, what do you notice from these cohorts? What are the common behaviors that you notice from these cohorts? And then what do they arm themselves up with, right? Like, what technology do they have to their disposal to help them out with? So on the behavioral side, one of the key things that we kind of noticed is, at least I have noticed it, they try to aspire for a better lifestyle. They are very aspirational, very goal driven. They don't want to be in the surroundings that they are. They want to push boundaries and get stuff done. They're extremely tech savvy. So if you give them a new product, if it's too technical, doesn't matter, they will find a way out. They'll learn on YouTube, they'll learn from their friends, they'll Google stuff, and they'll find out how to use it. And they also happen to be early adopters. So if there is a new thing that's out there, they will actively go seek it. They like the aspect of, yes, I was the first person to find out what the solution is, or here, I've experimented with it. So they love being that generation, which goes ahead and finds out what those things are. They also trust influencers more than offline friends, which is a little scary, where they trust information coming in from influencers. So this could be, social influencers, or it could be political influencers, or it could be any kind of influencer. Anyone that they look up to online is something that they will end up trusting. So it's very interesting data point. And then interestingly, it's actually they favor their uh, what do you say, responses more than an offline friend that they have. And the last point is they are definitely the go-to person in the family for new tech. They love like they again, being the early adopters and being extreme tech savvy has an advantage, right? So they end up being the person who knows the stuff most usually in a family. Now, going to the technology setup, like what do they have at their disposal? This is typically a mid-end Android device. They ensure that they have paid, they've saved up money, or they get a really good Android device with a great camera. Like that's the first criteria that people look for. They'll probably be on a Geo device, probably. Again, on LTE network, most of the content consumption happens on LTEs, barely any Wi-Fi, and they have a lot of video and image editing apps, and they are very receptive to making online payments. So they love the fact that they can do online payments. It's easy. Um, they look at UPI setups. They'll have the whole gamut, right? Like whatever kind of payment that they need to do, they will have that, and they're very receptive to doing that. Let's go to the next section, right? The second cohort is a little tech averse, so they don't embrace tech as much as what Gen Z used to do. So this is the behavioral data here. It's very interesting because what you end up seeing is technology for women in tier 2, tier 3 cities, they perceive it as a utility and not a vanity. So it's not like, oh, I have a phone. I want a good phone. No, it's I need a phone to make a call or make a text or send a text. I don't need a phone apart from that, right? That's essentially what they think about when they look at an online device or a device that gets them online. They usually trust the shopkeeper or anyone who's next to the home. They usually trust them. They don't trust something that they see online. It's a very important factor, right? Because as a person, you are accustomed to understanding what those shopkeepers need or what you need, and the shopkeepers are usually the ones that they look at to get that advice. The third point is they rely on family members to help with tech. It's pretty interesting to understand, like, this is engagement metric, right? So you can see it, and I'll give you an example of this. So let's say if they want to actually find out a particular product online, they actually don't go online themselves. What they do is they will ask their friend to essentially send them an image of that particular product, and then they will send it to the kids or to their relatives who are very tech savvy and say, hey, can you order this for me? And that's usually how that behavior works. So one example would be let's say a lady in Nagpur. She'll get a image of this beautiful salwar, and she'll essentially say, hey, I'm going to take a screenshot of this, takes a screenshot, and then sends it to her daughter who's sitting in Mumbai and asks them, hey, can you go ahead and buy this for me, right? And that's usually how the transaction operates, which is very interesting to see because, and the reason why that is so is because there's a trust factor to it and there's challenges to it, right? I'll get to that in a bit, but I'm giving an example of how this would come across. Um, the last one is afraid of online payments, and this is where they are looking at, because they usually don't have that kind of opportunity to hold cash or to keep money. And this is changing, right? Like with the whole every citizen should have a bank account. This is definitely changing. And one of the things that women still in tier 2, tier 3 cities don't have are bank accounts or a debit card. They usually carry cash. So and also they're afraid of making an online transaction. They fear that they may not end up completing the transaction, or they fear that they may hit the wrong button and they lose the money. So there's a lot of nuances there. Like, so getting them to be confident about making an online transaction is difficult. And obviously, our financial institutions don't make it simple either to make an online transaction. There is a whole process of getting a PIN, and then making sure the user gets that PIN code, understands what a PIN code is, and what part of the message is the PIN code, and then typing that PIN code in, and then clicking next. And the UX differs based on the bank that you work with. So there's a whole plethora of problems in the payment space, especially when it comes to having women like this kind of get up to speed and how to use this and be confident with something like this. In terms of technology setup, again, going back to the first point that we saw in the behavioral data, which is they look at it as a utility. So they end up usually having like a low-end device. Most of them, not most of them, some of them have a feature phone. Feature phone is literally like the old Nokia phones that we used to have, just a top screen and then the buttons. It'll probably be a Geo Life phone. It'll still have LTE and 4G, but the screen is really small. It doesn't make sense to even browse on that. But ultimately, like for them, it doesn't matter. For them, it's all about making a call or texting someone. They'll usually have like a Geo phone or Vodafone or 3G, because Vodafone has the largest 3G network in India. So usually it's a balance between the two. If they have a smartphone, one of the things that you'll see in their devices will be WhatsApp and devotional apps. This is usually what they end up having in their phones. And they don't, like, and the last point is, like, they don't have a credit card. Like, they don't have a debit card, to be very precise. They usually borrow someone's card. So we have heard stories where if they want to make a purchase, they go ahead and ask the neighbor, hey, can we borrow your debit card? And they actually give them cash. That's usually how it happens. Or most of them rely on just cash on delivery. So there's stories where they try to understand if a product is something that they really need, they end up going in that direction. So let me go to the last one, right? So this is a merchant. So this is your usual shopkeeper. And again, this is a cohort that we identified, or at least I saw after COVID. So again, all the data points that I have will be very biased towards what happens after COVID. So one is they are very determined to make as much sales as possible. Again, as a shopkeeper, you should be. Second, they rely on friends and WhatsApp messages to educate themselves. So very few of them go into social media and get information, or social media like Facebook or Instagram, and look at ads. Most of them rely on WhatsApp messages and friends. So if you are a business that is aiming to build something for shopkeepers in tier 2, tier 3 cities, my guidance would be create referral campaigns, create WhatsApp stickers or WhatsApp images, right? Like create those custom creatives so that you can end up passing that on, and you can essentially encourage people to just share that as often as possible. That's essentially what their behavior is, right? Like they rely on that information, because when they get it from a friend, they consider it more trustworthy than they're getting it online. Very fascinating insight. Another one is they actually prefer voice-based chat or search. I don't know if anyone's seen this, but I've seen shopkeepers or people sending shopkeepers a voice-based cart. So they'll open up WhatsApp and they just click on the microphone button and just say, hey, here's the stuff that I need, and just click submit. Again, the shopkeeper will hear that out, click on the thing, and they speak and they close it out. The idea here is, look, there are two things. One, they're not familiar with English, or they're not familiar with typing things out. Second, a voice is much better or faster or convenient for them because they have n number of other things to look at. Voice is just more convenient to go ahead and click a button and just record and send out. The last point is something that it just shows the resiliency of this country, right? Like COVID essentially had pushed all the shopkeepers to move ahead and kind of embrace online adoption, right? Like, how do I get what I need or what products I need online to my customers? So everyone, like some of the stories that I heard was people started creating like WhatsApp groups or WhatsApp broadcast groups where they kept sending stuff out, right? Like they just said, hey, here's all the items that's on sale. And they just keep sending those stuff out. Some of the shopkeepers, if they have the resources, they go ahead and set up a stall below the building, right? People willing to go to that extent of understanding very creative methods to understand how do I get online. And it's fascinating, like local Dukan and then Dukan.io. All of these are like companies who have kind of uh, embraced that and kind of helping these people right now. What's the technology setup? This is where things get very interesting. Again, these are shopkeepers who have definitely larger inventories. They want to be equipped with the right set of technologies. So they actively invest in having the right set of technologies. So that's why they spend quite a bit of money on getting a high-end or a mid-end device with a large screen. They typically have two devices or two SIMs. Again, they have WhatsApp and devotional apps. That's something that is baked into their habits. They will have those things. One of the stories that I heard was like when you go to the shopkeeper, when teams are doing research. Again, this is a startup that I was working with. When they're doing customer research, a shopkeeper, the first thing that they do when they open up the shop is, they agarbatti say they'll do the puja and stuff, and then they'll open up their devotional app and just put the phone on the side, right? Like they just use that as a radio. Very interesting, and like they don't start their business without that. Like they do that, keep it on the side, and just then go on with the day. The last one is something that again ties back to the behavioral data of COVID has accelerated adoption. Oftentimes, some of the shopkeepers, not just FMCG, but furniture walas or other kind of merchants, they usually rely on cash. There's probably for tax purposes. And what now has changed is they are open to it. They're open to that QR code based transactions. They're open to UPI based transactions. They kind of understand that. It's a pretty interesting technology setup. Let me pause here for questions. I do see a few of them come in. I'll just start with Archana. It's all about strong infrastructure. What are the key metrics when doing user research for next 100 million users? Uh, Amit's question is about what are the key metrics when doing user research for the next 100 million users? It's There are no key metrics per se, because when you're doing research, you're looking at sort of the guardrails, right? Like, hey, it's a hypothesis that you want to try and prove. So whenever you're doing user research, you start with like a working hypothesis, and then you say, okay, does this hypothesis work? Is this something that the user is receptive to? So one of the things that we tried doing, I'll give you an example of like not a key metric, right? Like we wanted to understand if I show a user a spinning wheel, a tier 2 user, a spinning wheel, let's say a page loads up, I click on something and then a page loads up after a while. If it takes, let's say, 5 seconds, or if it takes 10 seconds, or if it takes 20 seconds, how do users react to it? And we essentially put those metrics in, right? We said, okay, what's the percentage of people that's going to abandon or say that they no longer want to wait on it after like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and 20 seconds. What we found out was essentially like it's extremely biased. Like something like that is very biased because it could depend on user to user, and user research typically gets done in like a small sample set of like 20 users. So you get a really biased answers. It doesn't make sense. So there aren't key metrics in a user research. Key metrics usually come in when you're doing A/B testing. So if you're doing A/B testing and you're rolling it out to a larger sample set, then go for it. Then you'll need what your revenue numbers are going to look like, what are your page abandonment rates, how many users are actually staying on the page, what's the dwell time. So you look at those kind of metrics and click-through rates and stuff, right? So those will be the key metrics here. On next, for user research is usually these guardrails. Archana's point about like if women are tech averse or if they don't get as many opportunities, they don't get as many opportunities. I 100% agree with that. And it's essentially when you talk to them, there are one half of the group who says, I don't need a phone, and the other half who says, yeah, I don't get that opportunity even to use that tech, right? So it's a pretty interesting data point there. Okay, I'm looking at just a thought. I think it's generalized when persona is labeled as women, because I think many of the behavioral data and tech setup that is mentioned may not be true. That's fair. I think just to point out, Survapura, one of the things is this is the next 100 million users. I wanted to make sure that it's something. I'm not labeling all women. I'm saying in next 100 million users, women is a category, and we want to make sure that it's something that you address because they usually don't have that much of a voice in those cities, and you want to make sure that you are building experiences for them. It's important that you do not miss them out in the whole noise that you hear from tier 2 cities or next 100 million users. It's important to you to focus on them because in tier 1 cities it's everything is good, right? But in tier 2, tier 3, as you go deeper, you'll start seeing these things, and uh, if you don't capture that, then you're missing out on something. So that's essentially what I wanted to kind of say there. Let me go into the next thing, right? All right, let's go to what are the challenges. So let's kind of focus on this one. So what are the challenges that they face? There are behavioral challenges and the technical challenges. Again, this ties back to the behavioral data that I talked about earlier, and how does it tie into what are the challenges that they face with that behavior, and how does the technical challenges tie to those tech data that they have. So let me first start with the behavioral challenges. What I've done here, just to show you on the slide, right? Here are the three main behavioral challenges, and then here are the personas that usually gets impacted. So we saw the three personas. I've essentially mapped those challenges back to the personas. So first thing is lack of trust. So both shopkeepers and women in tier 2 cities, they don't trust an online store. It's as simple as that. They especially don't trust big time players. They really trust the local store owner. And one of the example is like Uncle Chacha will know what I need, right? I can go to that store. I've been shopping there for the past 20 years, 30 years. He knows me very well. She knows me. I'm going to get the product that I need. I'm going to get the best value for money from that store because I have the ability to bargain with them. It just gives them then that's one of the biggest point there, right? So if and now here's where as a PM you can try and understand why is that, and if you are trying to build a product that's going to enable them to to trust that even more, or to kind of upgrade them to that online experience, your pathway to that user should be through the shopkeeper. So start with the shopkeeper and then go from there, right? Because again, you got to get that information. You got to help people through that trusted source. So all your social marketing and Instagram, all of that is essentially going down the drain if you don't understand what that trust mechanism looks like today. So going to the technology literacy, right? Again, this is where I want to talk about how UXs are built. So if you look at what are the right apps for me, right? Like there's a lot of people, a lot of apps out there. There's a lot of different purchasing online payment systems. There's a different mechanism for returning goods. How do I navigate these? Like again, this applies to the women in the shopkeeper segment. They do want to take advantage of all of this. So let's say they cross the first challenge and they get into the next one. It's essentially like it's just new world to them, right? Like they haven't seen these experiences like we have. So how do you do that? How do I like? And they have that inherent fear as well, which is what if I make a mistake? What happens then? So again, here the way you got to look at solving this is give them a voiceover or give them sort of a tooltip. Help them understand that. It's a pretty interesting. It's a very tough problem to solve because again, these users are on a really small screen and you are looking to help guide them. And typically, again, this goes back to the behavioral challenges that we talked about earlier, the behavioral data that we saw, where they take the image and they send it to the daughter in Mumbai and say, hey, purchase something for me. This is where I think if you can solve that problem by understanding how do they go about, what's the right experience for them? Should we give them some sort of voiceover as they visit the site? Should we, like, this goes back to the Clippy days in Microsoft Word, right? You had a paperclip who used to come up and help ask you for things. It could be as simple as that, right? Like it could be, again, I'm not saying go implement Clippy, but I'm saying you could look at something like that where it's aiding you through that shopping experience or through that purchase experience through a voice that they understand. Again, you can't just throw English at them. You've got to understand what do they speak, how do the, what what's the vernac that they follow. All of this stuff is important. So the last thing going to the human element. So this kind of neatly ties into the last piece, which is they have a lot of questions in their mind before buying a product. Is this the best price that I'm going to get? Is there EMI options with it? Is this are there different colors for it? I don't like this color. Can I get another color? How do I drive a bargain? So all of this is missing in an online experience today, right? Like, because you're familiar with, again, this exists across all the cohorts, because you kind of get this experience when you go to a store, to an offline store. There is someone familiar who is helping you out through that process. It just makes sense to ask those questions and get an answer. But online, you don't get those things, because it's online. It's just you and the other person. Like, it's an online experience, and you who's interacting with that experience and trying to get an answer. And you may not have most of those questions. So it's pretty interesting to kind of hear those kind of feedback and challenges. So let's go into the technical challenges that people have, right? And this applies, the first two applies to all cohorts, subpar networks. This is really important, because when you look at solving the behavioral challenges, usually you want a really good experience, right? You want a very superior experience, an adaptive experience based on the cohort that you're serving. But you can't build that experience on when the users are on a subpar network and on slow devices. And this is where innovation happens. Innovation needs to happen at this space, because you're trying to give a rich experience, or an experience that can help solve the customer's problem through a network that is very subpar, or through a device that is really poor. So again, subpar networks, just to give you context, I was working with a telco in Lucknow. What we found out, it was pretty interesting. So we actually had set up multiple devices in Lucknow, and we literally requested our site, right, like Amazon, a site throughout the day, just like 5 phones across the city, and we're just understanding how that behavior looks like. Interestingly, we could notice that telco networks get clogged up from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Clogged up in the sense, any request that goes out, it's just extremely slow. So just loading a page just takes time, at least like 50 to 40% slower. But as soon as you finish 11 p.m. or you get into the midnight area, your performance just increases. Like, it just improves like 4 times. Very interesting data point, and it's just on the spectrum, right? Like, you have so many users latching onto the 700 megahertz spectrum that India has in these cities, that you don't end up, you end up clogging that network. And the other part of this is, well, telco networks do know about it, but they're not incentivized to fix them either, because one, they have to pay a TRII for the amount of spectrum that these telcos consume, and on top of it, the revenue that they get from per user is very small. So it's not really incentivizing them to fix these networks. So they look at more units sold versus what the experience looks like on those networks. It's unfortunately a bad situation for us to be in. But again, we have to, as PMs building these kind of interfaces, you need to be cognizant about it, because this will creep up. When you build a brilliant experience and you try to get this out there, you don't want an infrastructure problem harming you from launching your experience, or at least getting the ROI that you need from your experience. The second thing is slow devices. Again, this is extremely, people usually don't look at this very closely, but usually, and again, this is not just slow devices means low-end devices. People are not buying cheaper devices. People are buying expensive devices. It just happens that they have a lot of malware in it. One good example was, there's a product director at Paytm who had gone and stayed at a tier 2 city, and he had a same phone, and he had someone else have the same phone. What he found out was, loading up an experience, the same experience on both the devices just looked drastically different. The big difference was there was just a lot of malware in the user's device, but on his device it was just loading up brilliantly or really quick. So again, what you got to think about is understand that it's inherently slow, and you got to make an experience that's going to be quick on these devices. Again, this goes back to your engineering feedback. You're giving them the feedback saying that, hey, you've got to build these kind of infrastructures. You've got to make sure that our experiences work on that. The third piece is the UX syntax. So understanding how UX works for these users. This goes back to the design team. One of the examples that I quoted there was like people equate the WhatsApp icon to the share icon. So if you're sharing something, the share icon is shown to users, but they don't understand if that's a share icon. But if they see WhatsApp icon, then they're like, "Yep, that's how the icon, like that's my share option. I'm going to click on that." So again, familiarizing yourself with what they interface today and getting those sort of understanding what those UX themes look like and bring that on is a big advantage. Otherwise, you'd be simply creating complex UXs and users will have no idea how to interact with it. So it's a pretty interesting challenge there. So let me talk about what company or what sort of sector tries to solve this really well, which is the business challenges of it, right? Which is social commerce. So trust again is one of the biggest problem that's out there. So with social commerce, you get the ability to reduce that barrier, right? Like people, because again, it's social. You're getting your friends to actually to recommend products for you. So this is truly the sort of the good outcomes of at least our generation, where we are understanding what people need and we understand what users need in tier two. And this is going to be the next wave of e-commerce anyways in the country. So how do you so now taking those behavioral impacts or challenges and how do we solve for them? So again, this is not, and again, the disclaimer that I want to make here is none of this content is related to what we're doing at Amazon. All of these are like public information, right? Like, so the way I want to kind of frame this up is there are interfaces that are being built today that allows a shopkeeper to chat directly with retailers, right? Or shoppers directly with the retailer. And that's a big advantage. So there is a company called Trell, which is again a video-based. It is similar to TikTok, but what they've started introducing is they started introducing shopping behavior or shopping within that. So you have influencers talking about products, and this goes back to the Gen Z problem, right, where they trust influencers. So connecting those two dots, whatever products that they recommend in that video stream, users start clicking on it and purchasing or converting it. So same thing, that's just one aspect of that trust chain. The second one is provide an avenue for these users to connect to the shopkeepers that they're familiar with, or allow the shopkeeper to educate these users about, hey, here's what we need to go get, here's a product that you should buy. And recommendations from friends and family. So how do you do referrals? How do you do invite users to the app? So it's pretty interesting to kind of leverage the people that they trust and build that ecosystem around them, right? The second thing is technology literacy. So how do I, again, this goes back to the navigation aspects of it, right? Here, use the terminology that they understand. So seamless buy and sell conversations. Try and set up a WhatsApp group or a WhatsApp business account to enable selling, because again, you don't want a user to go through that complex thing of, okay, type in something in my browser and then look at the home page and then click on a product and there is a search bar even in the website. That's just too much for them. Make it simple. Deploy your, if you're selling a product, first ask a question, why can't this be on WhatsApp? Before even you build a website, right? What's the problem with why do you need a website? Why can't you just have a referral list, go to storekeepers and tell them, hey, here's a if you refer me to 100 customers, here's an incentive that you're going to get, and then drive your commerce through messaging apps. Why can't you do that? You got to think through, you got to answer those questions before you even invest in building a website, because ultimately when you build a website, it may not even be useful because people might not know how to transact through your website. And the last one is a human element. So again, this is sort of taking it really up the notch. This is live video shopping, where you can actually ask in real time if there's any questions about the product, or you could just look like how Amazon does it, which has a QA section for each product. You ask a question, and then they have other users answer for them. But again, like you got to tie this back to trust. You can't just have any random person reply to those answers. You've got to have someone who they trust as an answer. Um, so that's where, like, I want to kind of tie all these things together, right? So when you're looking at solving for the next 100 million users, start with who are you building this for? So the three personas that I showed you are usually the most common ones. Again, depends on your use case. If you're looking at another use case, like for example, doctors that live in tier 2, tier 3, or tier 3 cities, that's a whole different cohort. I'm talking about like consumer products. If you want to look at personas, these are the most common personas that you'll find in tier 2, tier 3, and the kind of challenges that they face. And so if you're building a product, be it fintech, be it payments, be it e-commerce, be it a gaming app, all of this should revolve around the challenges that they have. So, and then always ask a question about, okay, why should I do this experience, or why do I need to build this kind of experience? Understand if they're familiar with it. Take mock-ups, or take, like, just print out these mock-ups on paper, go to tier 2 city, and just show, right, like, hey, what is this, what would you do on this page? If you have this kind of interface, what would you actually do? Do they prefer voice-based transactions? And I'll give you an example of a voice-based thing, right? Like, if you're on a page, and let's say if you're making a payment somewhere, what if there's a microphone button on the corner of the page? They click on that, and just reads voiceover of the entire thing. And that microphone could be made to look exactly like the WhatsApp microphone. So it could be that, or it could be a play button, because play is instantly, they know that it's just playing something. So I click on that, and then I get to hear the voice recording of the entire page. So things like that. So think about who your user is, who are you targeting, and how do you look at solving for them. Again, this is just one example. There's no silver bullet to this. I'm not giving you a recipe to go build. I'm essentially outlining what are the problems out there. Building is something that teams will need to go and end up doing.